In this session, you will work with me to create a dice rolling app. Just the simple idea of a pair of dice on the screen, and we press a button and it rolls them. Let's see what this looks like. General idea, I've got an image of a die object, and I've got another image of a die object, and a button. And when the roll button is pushed, what do I end up with? I end up with the dice pictures changing to a new roll. Randomly, right? Random set of numbers. Okay? There are a few things we need to understand, though, to make this work. For one thing, we don't know anything about random numbers yet. And secondly, we haven't really done too much with images yet. We had them on our button back in one of the earlier activities, but these are just standalone images. They're not buttons. They don't do anything by themselves. So let's get started. Okay, so let's create a new project. Get started on our dice roller. I'll call it Dice. All right, so let's see what we wanted here now. We wanted to have two images for our dice. I'll go ahead and I'll call these. I'm going to rename them. Die 1 and Die 2. Oops, not image Die 2. Die 2. Die 2. Okay. I wanted those side by side, so I'll go ahead and I'll stick a horizontal arrangement in here, and I'll put them inside it. Okay. Now we haven't worked too much with these image properties before, or with these image components before. Notice that they don't have too many properties. They have a picture, and whether or not it's visible or not, and then the size. So for the picture, I'm going to go ahead and stick in there the dice files that we downloaded earlier. There they are, red die 1. And I'm going to make both of them show red die 1. Okay? But something that we need to be aware of is, right now, the app only knows about this one file. This one PNG file is associated with the app. The other dice, I've downloaded them to my computer, but they're sitting off on my computer and they're not associated with the app. So what I'd like to do is I'd like to load all 6 images into my app. And to do that, I'm going to scroll down here, and there's a fifth panel that we haven't seen before. We haven't noticed because it's been kind of beneath the fold. Right? And it's media. And notice that the media associated with this app right now is just red die 1. I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to upload the other images, the other dice images as well. There. Okay, and unfortunately I've got to do them all one at a time. Okay, number 2. Oh, goodness. It takes a little bit of doing, but once they're there, they'll be there. 3. 4. And 6. Okay. Now that all of the files are there, all the files are there, I can very easily change the property of any of these dice to be one of these other images. More importantly, I can programmatically do the same thing. Right? But for right now, I'm going to just go ahead and set those back to 1 and 1. And that's kind of what we're going to do when we roll our dice, is we're going to change those pictures to the corresponding image of the dice. Okay, the other thing I needed on here was what? A roll button. Text says roll. There we go. Okay. Good enough. Okay. Now, that's what we want our interface to ultimately look like. So let's go ahead and go into our block editor and think about what we need to do. When the roll button is pushed, I want to, what? Roll the dice. What does that mean? I want to change the dice picture to a random value between 1 and 6. Okay. So let's see. When button 1 is clicked, what does I want to do? I need to generate a random number. And so far, all the numbers we've been working with have been in this math drawer. And, oh, sure enough, there it is. Okay. Random integer from 1 to, I don't want 100, I want 6. Okay. And we'll notice that this is something that goes into a value. So what do I want to do with that value? Well, for right now, what I think I'm going to do is I'm going to create a variable to store that number. Because I'm going to generate that number, and then I'm going to want to use that number a couple different times. So I'm going to create 2 global variables. Die1 val, and I'm going to initialize it to 0. And duplicate that, because I also want die2 val. Okay. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to take that variable and I'm going to set die1 to a random number between 1 and 6. And I'm going to do the same thing for number 2. Set die2 to a random value between 1 and 6. Okay, so now I've got my button able to roll the dice. When button 1's clicked, I'm going to generate a random number between 1 and 6 and assign it to die1. And I'm going to generate a random number between 1 and 6 and assign it to die2. Let's see if this works. But visually, it doesn't do anything right now, right? When I push the button, it's changing the internal state of my program, but nothing's being displayed. It's not changing the images. It's not displaying those values anywhere. This would be a good place to use my notifier that I learned about back in lesson 1. So let's go ahead and drag this guy out here. I'm going to add a notifier. Remember, it doesn't appear on the screen because this is a pop-up. It's not a permanent part of my interface. So now I've got a notifier associated with this app. Let's go ahead and generate the message that I want to display. So remember, I'm going to show a message. And what message do I want to show? I'd like to show the value of die1 and the value of die2. So how am I going to do that? Well, let's go to my text here, and I'm going to join together die1, and I'm going to get the value of die1. But you know what? I'm going to do both dice. So I'm going to extend this join a little bit. I'm going to add some strings. So I'm going to join together 4 things. I want die1, die2. Duplicate this guy. Get die2's value. Right? So now what I'm doing is I'm generating a piece of text that says die1 and then whatever die1's value is. Die2, whatever die2's value is. And that's the message that I want to communicate. Okay, the title for my message doesn't really matter. Dice. And this is going to pop up a dialog box, and it's going to make me say that I've seen it. It's going to make me confirm. So it's got a button on it, and I'm going to say, OK. Yeah, I've seen it. OK. So now if I stick that in here, now when my button's pushed, it assigns the values and then displays them temporarily, just so I can see them. Let's see what this looks like. OK, so I come into my screen here, and I'm going to push the roll button, and it generates that string. Die 1's value is 3, and die 2's value is also 3. Let's try again. Die 1's value is 4, die 2's value is 6. Okay. And I can do this until I'm satisfied that I'm generating some dice rolls that work. Okay. Cool. So I know that I've got my random numbers working properly. Now the only thing left to do is assign those values, somehow relate those values back to those images. There's a couple ways to do this. And since this is a unit on conditional processing, we might think that I'm going to ask a question of the data, right? What value did you roll? What value is stored in die 1 to 2? Oh, let's get the picture for the red 2. Okay? Let's go back in and make that change. So let's see. I'm going to take this out for right now because I don't want it. It was just kind of in there to help me understand my program. I'm going to set it aside. Okay. So what did I want to do? I wanted to ask a question. If what? What's my question? I want to look at the value that's stored in die 1's value, and I want to ask, did you roll a 1? So I'm going to do a comparison, right? I'm going to use this relational operator. So what? Get die 1's value. And is it a 1? When I roll a 1, then what do I want to do? I want to set die 1's picture to, what's the picture? Let's go back and look. The picture property has some text in it. It has a file name in it, reddie1.png, right? One of those file names. It's one of those 6 names. And that's just text. So when I roll a 1, reddie1.png. Okay. And you know what? It's the same thing, right? Duplicate that. If the value is 2, then I'm going to set the picture to reddie2. And I'm going to do that 6 different times. There's 6 questions, 6 possible conditions that can happen here, right? One more. Okay, now let's go ahead and change all those. So ask the question, did you roll a 3? If you did, set the picture to reddie3. Did you roll a 4? Set the picture to reddie4. Did you roll a 5? Set the picture to reddie5. And finally, did I roll a 6? Set the picture to reddie6. Okay, now notice I am asking 6 independent questions. And what I could do is I could, like in my previous example, set these up as else if statements if I wanted to. We'll come back to that. Let's go see if this works. Okay, so I've got my interface working here. If I push the roll button, what's going to happen? I rolled a 2, I rolled a 1, I rolled a 6. We see it's changing. That's pretty cool stuff, huh? So now I've got something that rolls the dice. Let's go back in and look at my code again for a second. Couple of thoughts. One, like I just said, if I wanted, I could use these else ifs to make it a little bit more efficient. If I want to get my second dice working, what can I do? I can copy all of these blocks and change it from die 1 val to die 2 val, right? Asking what die 2 val's role was. One other thing you may notice, the way I've structured my file name here is kind of convenient, right? Notice that what's happening is every time I ask, did you roll a 1? Set it to red die 1. Did you roll a 2? Set it to red die 2. Did you roll a 3? Set it to red die 3. In fact, I don't really need to ask these questions. What I could do is instead I could construct this string based on the outcome value, right? The only thing that changes from each of these conditions is the number in the file name that I'm working with. And that file name is just a string. It always follows the pattern of what? Red die 1 followed by the number followed by .png. I just need a way that I can combine those three components into a file name, kind of like this. Right? Let's try that out. So what I want to do instead of asking all these questions is set die 1's picture to joining, and there were three strings I wanted to join together, right? The first one was literally red die, followed by, well, get the value out of for the dice, right? Followed by the number that I rolled, followed by .png. Okay, so what this is going to do now is it's going to create this string. If I roll a 5, it's going to create red die 5 PNG, right? And that's the same thing we saw down in here. If I rolled a 5, set the picture to red die 5.png. And the cool thing about this is much more compact. Set die 2's picture to whatever I rolled for die 2. Let's see if this works. Now when I roll the dice, 6 and a 3, 3 and a 6, 5 and a 6, 2 and a 3. Pretty cool. So my next question is this app useful? Well, yes and no. I mean, it's not a very fun game to just watch dice being rolled. However, what this app can do is serve as a dice roller when you don't have a pair of dice handy, but you still want to play a game. In the first unit, I talked about the idea of where processing happens. Does it happen in the app, or does it happen in the user's head? Does it happen external to the app? Right? I could use this dice roller to play a game, and the user can decide what the rules are. Or I can choose to embed the logic in the game, in the app itself, and make it a complete, a total package. And that's what we'll do in the next session, is we'll add some logic for a game for this dice roller.